So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, because I know you've joined from different parts of the world. So, thank you so much for joining in. Welcome to the second episode of BBG Women's Leadership Series. In the first episode, which most of you attended, you would recall that we had featured Mrs. Vanita Uppal, a principal British school. And in today's session, we have with us another very distinguished personality, Mrs. Deepa Gopalan Wadhwa. Deepa is an accomplished career diplomat who joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1979 and retired in December 2015. She was the first Indian woman to be appointed ambassador to the Gulf state of Qatar and later Japan. May I request everybody to put their systems on mute, please? She served as ambassador of India to Japan from 2012 to 2015, Qatar from 2009 to 2012, and Sweden from 2005 to 2009. She was currently accredited as ambassador to Latvia from Stockholm and Republic of the Marshall Islands from Tokyo. During her career, she has also held other significant assignments in Geneva, Hong Kong, China, the Netherlands, the International Labour Organization, and the Ministry of External Affairs. She has handled a wide swath of issues and subjects related to India's relation with key countries such as Pakistan, China, and Japan. She's participated in international conferences and negotiations related to climate change, sustainable development, disarmament, and human rights, and was instrumental in active promotion of India's economic interest in areas of trade, technology, investments, and energy security during her postings in Europe, the Gulf, and Japan. She's a globally respected leader and an active and involved member of various cross-border organizations. She's also on the boards of multiple companies, ranging from manufacturing to consulting to technology and healthcare. So very, very big welcome to Deepa for being with us here today and sharing her experiences during her vast career. And in conversation with her today is BBG committee member Kim Kolako. Kim is the Executive Director, Enterprise Strategy at ASA. ASA is a 30-year accounting firm with a team of over 700 professionals spread across 8 offices in India. ASA helps British companies set up offices in India, find partners, takes care of taxation, accounting, and other business requirements. Kim is an MBA from University of Cambridge, Judge Business School, and a postgraduate from Goa Institute of Management. Kim has had a vast experience managing India inbound investments, international expansions, business strategy, launching and growing new initiatives, and managing strategic alliances. She has executed projects across industries from financial services and technology to energy, defense, aerospace, and manufacturing. So big welcome to you too, Kim, as well. And we look forward to your conversation with Deepa. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to a fabulous discussion with Mrs. Wadhwa. Deepa, good afternoon. As we heard in the introduction, you've had this phenomenal, distinguished career as a diplomat from 1979 all the way to 2015, and it hasn't stopped after that. You are now on the board of multiple companies. Now, you were the first woman to be appointed ambassador to Qatar, and then later the first woman appointed to Japan. So, could you tell us a little bit about how you got into the diplomatic service? What prompted this move?
So, thank you very much, Kim, and thank you, Nidhi, for that introduction. I always find introductions a little awkward because it seems that one has done far more than one has. But delighted to be here and delighted to be, invited to address members of the BBG. The question that you asked him is, how did I wander into the Foreign Service? I think I was extremely fortunate that I did, because it has been an extremely wonderful journey. It suited my nature. This is what I wanted to do. Did I know when I started off where I wanted to be? No. So I think as a young person growing up in India and growing up going to school basically the 60s and the early and college in the 70s, the career options for women or the general world was pretty limited. And particularly for women, I mean, you thought of doctors, teachers, academia was an area that you went to, or the civil services. And I think my parents were extremely supportive to begin with, which I was very fortunate. And while others, they were, we all went to university. There were a lot of my peer group who were there with me. But invariably, what happened was at the end of university that they settled in to domesticity. Of course, later they did do other things, but nobody was looking at a career option, a sort of a hardcore career option. What happened with me was I think I chose a bureaucracy because it was a place where my parents were comfortable to the extent that it would be a stable and secure career. And for me also, it gave me an opportunity to work in different areas because the options in the bureaucracy are very, very diverse. How did I wander into the Foreign Service is a story by itself, because I think at that time there was the whole thing of, going abroad, representing your country, interacting with different cultures. Foreign policy was exciting. You saw people who visitors from abroad. You saw our leaders going abroad. So there was a little bit of that glamour quotient, a little bit, I should be very honest with you. But it was really something that one in those days, and we traveled very little in those days, I must say, in India, that one looked forward to. My parents would have been much happier with me opting for the Indian Administrative Service, which would have kept me in India and close to them. I must tell you that I come from the south of India and fairly conservative home. And then when I gave the Foreign Service as my option, I actually didn't tell them. But I wrote this examination and I succeeded. And I also have to say that as I succeeded, and when I written the written examination and I went in for my interview. So these were one of the first experiences I had of what people thought of the Foreign Service. Because when I went in for the interview with the Union Public Service Commission, the chairman of the board, there were these about 10 very senior people, he asked me, do you plan to marry a cook? And I looked at him and I said, I beg your pardon, sir. And I don't understand you. And he said, you have opted for the Foreign Service. And as a woman opting for the Foreign Service, what are your prospects of getting married? What is the prospect of, anybody coming with you, traveling with you across the world? So already you realize that in a woman in the Foreign Service, you were in a sort of a box that wasn't looked on very well. So this, in a way, is a journey into the Foreign Service. Like every other profession, all of us women who are in different professions, there were challenges. And, it was part of the story, particularly in the earlier years. There were a lot of challenges. But you also asked me about the fact that I was the first woman ambassador to Qatar, and then again, the first Indian woman ambassador to Japan. That is true. But I think that also is a story of the history of India. Because, women started joining the Foreign Service, as after independence. And not many did, for the reasons that I told you, that people didn't want their daughters to join the Foreign Service, get away from their homes. It was a conservative society. I suppose even the establishment didn't quite look on very well on women, as a result of which there were very few of us. And then as we matured in service and we grew in service, there were countries where we had never sent a woman before, and we were ready to be ambassadors, and therefore we went. But when I say this, I must say that in both the postings to Qatar and to Sweden, that my male colleagues did look and say, is the government really doing well by sending a woman there? And how would she really be able to be effective? Because both were seen as very male-dominated societies and environments. But what I did find, and that's particularly true of Qatar, was that actually my gender perhaps was an advantage in many ways, because they would deal with India. Everybody deals with India. And as I speak to, I know people across, different nationalities, I do want to say that, India is treated with great respect wherever we are. And when you represent a country as large as India, the demography of India, the economic size of India, we played an important political role. I think they just have to take you seriously, whether, irrespective of gender. So in that sort of way, gender was incidental. But it feels nice to be told that I was the first to do anything.
That's always lovely to hear. We see a lot about the public side of the position of an ambassador. Could you give us an inside view of the life of an ambassador? What was it like behind the scenes?
Right. So, when you look at diplomacy, and I'm sure there are people here who have experience of this, there are different aspects of diplomacy. So there is the political relationship. So when you go to a country, you are sent by the head of state of the country. You carry a little paper saying that you are sent by the president or the king or emperor, to serve in the other country on his behalf. So at that point of time, you're representing all the interests that your country has in that other country. And these very broad categories that I would put in would be political relations. So political relations would be government to government. Political relations would go beyond the central government level, also, for example, to the provincial level, but to have a very strong political constituency in the country where you are, where you can turn to for support when you need, where you can explain what India stands for. So that the perhaps the most important part of what ambassadors do is really the political relationship. You develop, you nurture political relationships, and you make sure that your country's standpoint is explained to the other host government. The second part, which has become extremely important, and particularly for India after our opening up after our reforms in 1991-92, has been economic diplomacy. Because now the world is really all run basically on economics. I mean, you have a lot of examples of, for example, China. On political issues, you may find that, countries of perhaps the so-called West within quotes and China may be on differing sides. But as far as the economic relationship is concerned, it's extremely important, and that affects the political relationship. So economic diplomacy, for the sake of economic diplomacy and for the sake of bringing two countries closer, that is important. But also more substantively, what can you do in getting investments into your country, in getting technology into your country, into getting development assistance into your country? And in that process, what you have to do is know your country very well and your needs of your own country. So I think economic diplomacy has been a very interesting part of it also because it's so tangible. Political relations are really in intangibles. You do something works out. I mean, you really can't put your finger on it. But economic relationships are wonderful. I won't name the company, but I could tell you a particular very large company when I was in Japan. And, I wanted them very much to come into India, and they deal with really garments, and I kept going to them, and I said, to the CEO of the company, who's also happened to be the owner, and saying that you must come into India, you must open retail stores, you must source from India. And it took me about 1.5 years to convince him in the first place to even look at India. And about 4 or 5 years later, he actually opened his stores in India. And remembered and invited me and said, Ambassador Wadhwa, you put the idea into my head. That tangible was very exciting, I must say. And this is true. I think a lot of us feel very enthusiastic about promoting economic relations, because that, and as you perhaps know yourself, Kim, as you asked me, the satisfaction that you get when you're able to clinch or close a deal like that is really wonderful. And then the third part of it is really what I would call cultural and information related work, where you talk about the soft power, use the soft power of India to be able to win friends, to tell people about what India stands for in a very different sort of way. So, and India, for example, I must say, is a major exporter of soft power, besides Bollywood. There are lots of other things in terms of values and what India stands for, starting from Gandhi, for example, and what he stood for. So there is that part of, there's a softer version, but it's extremely influential. I loved going down to universities and schools and talking to people and asking people, what do you know about India? What more should you know about India? And putting that seed of interest in India in their minds. So that is the other part of what an ambassador does. And so an ambassador would go off. I mean, as an ambassador, I think I visited, in Japan, most of the universities, leading universities that were there, interacted with young people because, of course, the youth are really the future, and had very good relations really with academia. So that is part of their soft power. And also you look at similarities between countries. I mean, you look at something, and I again go back to Japan. I mean, there was so much of cultural similarities, which I think neither of us are very conscious about. So for me, it was a discovery to learn about it and to be able to share it and for people to teach me about it. And the fourth part of it, which is extremely important, I think, in certain postings, and increasingly so, because India has a diaspora, I think, of about 25 million. I mean, figures differ. And about 8 million of them were in the Middle East, in West Asia, in the Gulf and the areas around. And I think the interests, the security, and to make sure that that they are taken care of in terms of crises, the Indian community is a very, very important part, an increasingly important part of what we do. Of course, in many parts of the world, the Indian community is doing extraordinarily well. I'm talking to the BBG, so whether it is the UK, the US, and in many in many places, they are actually leading this interest, the growing interest in India. But besides that, also, I particularly would like to talk about what happened when I was in the Middle East, because you had extremely wealthy Indians, the Indians who went off to make a better life. And I would say 90% of them, 95% did extraordinarily well, very happy with what they were doing. They were able to send remittances back. So it was a happy story. But in all these stories, there are always a small percentage who do not really have such good experiences. And there were a lot of blue-collar workers in that part of the world when I was there who had pretty horrific experiences. And, it was important for us, and important for me as ambassador, to be accessible to the least important, the most, nobody's insignificant as a human being, but in terms of, if you look at economic hierarchies or social standings, to be accessible to them, to feel that there is this person. If I represent the government of India, if I represent India, I have to be there because I really work for them, I represent them. So that was a part of a job, which, I must say, when I joined the Foreign Service, I didn't really anticipate that one would do so much of it. And I'm talking to a women's group, and I want to also tell you, this could be all sorts of issues. I'm not only talking about blue-collar workers not getting their dues or being discriminated. There are lots of not happy stories, but it could be women. It could be Indian women, married in some remote part of the world and facing all sorts of challenges and finding there is no way they can turn to but this kind of, faceless organization called the embassy. And, to be there for them, to be able to come and talk to us and help them. And I have a lot of, stories about these individual experiences that one had. And even if one helped, 5 out of 10, it was very satisfying. So that, in a way, of course, I must say another part of it, which I shouldn't forget, is what is called, so there's bilateral diplomacy and there's multilateral diplomacy. And multilateral diplomacy is when you are, representing India in different multilateral bodies, such as the United Nations, and there are other regional bodies. So that is also part of diplomacy. And when, I heard Nidhi read out my CV, and she was talking about me being involved with, the negotiations on climate change or human rights or disarmament. It was in that capacity as representing India as part of the delegation that negotiated international treaties and understandings on global issues that one was involved. And that is also a part of what an ambassador or a diplomat does.
That all sounds fascinating. And I mean, I wish we had more than 1 hour to dig into all of this. But, one thing that stands out is that I'm sure during your career, there would have been many, many situations where you found yourself the only woman in the room. Forget about being the only female leader in the room, but just the only woman in the room. And how do you navigate these power structures? How do you navigate power structures that are, already established in there?
Not easy. So I could tell you not easy. So to begin with, I go a little bit into the history of the Foreign Service, a little bit. So 1947, we get independent. We decide to create a civil service of our own. I mean, we have inherited something called the Indian Civil Service, but there is no diplomatic service per se because we weren't an independent country. And at that point of time, and I say this particularly because people don't know, when they started having a civil service exam to recruit people, there was a big debate. Should women join the Indian Foreign Service or not? And what is surprising is, according to accounts that I have seen, I have read, that the British outgoing government did advise Prime Minister Nehru that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to begin with. And he was extremely, he was conflicted because he said, here we were talking about a country that would be a democracy where you could not discriminate against anybody based on, gender, religion, what have you. And on the other hand, how could you say that this part of the bureaucracy would not be open to women? So women were permitted from the beginning to join. And there was this absolutely wonderful woman who joined in the first year. Her name was C.V. Mutamma. She's quite a legend. She coincidentally happened to come from the same small little Mofussil college that I was in Chennai. But she, when she joined, she had to give an undertaking that she would not get married. And if she got married, she would leave. So I am trying to put this in the context of the mindsets that we were working with. So to come back to what happened when I joined, this lady had gone to court and a lot of these very discriminatory rules had been removed. And it was far better. But it's easier to change rules than it is to change what is inside the minds of people, the mindsets of, and basically men who were there. It was much more difficult for them to accept women. So I have one or two things which tell you, some of the experiences that I had. So I chose to learn Chinese. So on the first posting that you go as a diplomat, you learn a foreign language. And I opted to learn Chinese. And I remember a very nice, avuncular old senior officer came to me and he said, my dear, are you sure you would not rather do French than Chinese? And I said, no, I'd really like to do Chinese. And then, I was just getting married. And he said, well, you must know that learning Chinese and having babies don't go together because it's a very tough language. Now, that was invading my personal space. But it was not politically incorrect. They didn't think of political correctness in those days. And this sort of thing, you kept having these, oh, she's gone off to have another baby now, she's not around. This is what happens when you get women and they want to have everything. And I will come back to this when later about women wanting everything. And I recall again, at another point in my career, I asked to work on Pakistan. I had an option and I said, I'd like to work. And my boss said to me, but surely you have a husband around. I had married a colleague of mine by then. You have a husband around because I hear you have 2 little children. So perhaps it's better that he does it than you. So, these were the sort of things. And you sat in a completely sort of a very male dominated environment. What was important was, and there was a lot of mansplaining. Okay, you had to also, you couldn't get emotional over issues. This was one thing, because they expected women to be slightly shrill. I mean, there was this expectation. So in many ways, you try to change yourselves to be able to be accepted by them. But I'll tell you, my own experience was, and I laugh about it, was that I really, in my early years, had to work perhaps double as much. And this means sitting long hours, showing that I had no other responsibilities in life, my children, my husband, nothing, to be accepted half as much. But that paid off later, because then I think as you grow older, they're more comfortable with you. And I'm sure this happens still. So this was not easy. Sometimes there was a slightly humorous angle to it. I recall when, going on trips to Pakistan and being part of their delegation to Pakistan. And Pakistan has a lot of women around. But the Indian delegation, I would very often be the only token woman. And that would always attract comment. And it wasn't only Pakistan, it could happen with other countries, but it did happen a lot in the context of the subcontinent. One just realized that it was an experience that women on both sides had, because we were finding our place under the sun. And it took a while to be accepted.
I can quite imagine. Brilliant, anecdotes once again. through all of this, through all of those experiences, through the challenges, through the wins, um, can you tell us a little bit about your mentors? Uh, who were they? How did you come across your mentors? Because one of the biggest things that whether you're a female professional or a male professional, having a mentor is something that can really make a difference in your career. And who were yours? How did you pick them? Did they pick themselves? How did
No,
that happen?
it's so interesting, Kim, because, I kind of segued into the corporate world after retirement, with my association with companies. Of course, I had worked with companies before, but in another context. And I kept hearing this conversation about mentors and mentees, which you do not hear very much, certainly in the Indian government. Let me tell you that. And, you got to be very, very careful of not being accused of nepotism or, there are all kinds of groups that are there. It's a very complex structure, I could tell you that. And the other thing is that the issue of being spatially dispersed. So it isn't one, great one organization that you're going through. Yes and no. Yes, you are. You're going to, you're going up the ladder in a huge organization, which is the government of India or the diplomatic service. But it's so spatially dispersed. So you cannot have really one mentor looking at you, taking care of you. What does happen, and it's never spoken about, but de facto, really what does happen is, I told you about having languages that you have to choose. So, people who have done, for example, a particular language, like we have the China group. So all of us who learned Chinese and lived in China, we all lived together. We had shared experiences. We had actually learned the language. We'd learned about the country and, our very complex relations and so on. There was a camaraderie. There was a fraternity, among us. And among those, there would be seniors who, without you really knowing, perhaps, took care of you. But it was never something that was very obvious. It didn't very deliberately come out and mentor you or tell you or anything. That wasn't part of the government, not when I was growing up. I don't know whether it has changed now and people are conscious of the need for this. But this could also have been to do with subjects. For example, I think two of my mentors, mentors in the sense that you use it. One certainly was, the officer that I reported to in China, who taught me a lot about China. So I looked up to him, and I think that relationship of mutual trust built because I learned a lot from him. And the other was a gentleman who, led the Indian climate change negotiations. And he really was a leader in the Framework Convention on Climate Change. He was our main negotiator. I learned a lot from him. And I think in that process, we formed a bond. So I have to say that in the corporate world, you look for mentors, and there's nothing sort of, you see the need for mentors and mentoring as something positive. That does not happen in this very conservative establishment called the government. But if you're fortunate, you will find a few good people along the way who teach you more than help you. You've got to make your own career out there, that really is the way it is. There are very few leg ups.
Understandable. The climate change bit that you brought out was quite interesting, and we have had some questions come in on that. Um, I'm going to ask you one final question before we move over to the Q&A from the members who have joined in. Do you have any advice for the next generation of female leaders? I mean, all of us have built we've basically grown up on the shoulders of the women who came before us. We've built on whatever was built by the leaders, by the pioneers who came in before us. So, what's your advice to the next few generations of women that are coming along?
Yes, Kim, it's a thought-provoking question. I'll base it a little bit on my own experiences, and that is basically you've got to know yourself. It's really important. You've got to know your innate strengths. What is it you like? you may, be pushed in a particular direction by either what is happening around you, by various kinds of pressures, but you've got to know what your strengths are, what you like, and build on those. I think that is very, very important. The second thing that I would give, and I'm giving it more in the context of women, is that don't expect special treatment because of gender. Very early in my career, there was a time when we were called, I must have been 10 years into my service, and the minister in charge of personnel called and said, called a few of us women and said, what did we think about quotas for women in the bureaucracy? And, to a woman, I won't say to a man, but to a woman, we said, no, it wasn't a good idea. Because already you were fighting a gender bias. And on top of that, if they felt that you came in with some sort of special considerations, they would take you even less seriously than they did. And maybe that doesn't work. I mean, maybe people do need a little bit of a push up. I can understand that. But that was the kind of feeling one had. So what I mean is that you must be very, very strong in your domain knowledge, know what you're doing, be absolutely masters and next to none. And then you can, I think, compete with the next person, and not use gender and feel that this I deserved completely. I think that's extremely important. And the third thing might seem like a bit of a contradiction, but what I want to say is that, women actually relate in many different ways. We're more intuitive. We very often know what the other person's about. We second guess, we know, and we very often want to please, This is also cultural, I think, particularly for countries from where we come. There is a certain cultural baggage that comes without us knowing, subconscious, it comes at a subconscious level that we have to be nice to people, we have to be polite, we have to be pleasing. And that's all very fine. But I don't think we have to change ourselves for anybody. And you can be feminine at the same time. I mean, you don't have to become a man to be able to compete in a man's world. You can be a woman completely. And I think that, I really, when working in an international arena, going for international meetings, I wore a sari every single day. And I was quite comfortable with the fact that I was Indian, I wore a sari, I was who I was. That kind of comfort in yourself, I think somehow projects as a confidence. And the other person then feels confident about being able to give you responsibility and knowing that you're somebody that he can rely or he or she can rely on. So that's what I would really think in terms of advice.
Brilliant. All right, thank you so much. Now we're going to move into questions from the audience, where we're just past the half-hour mark. So I'm going to hand over the baton to my fellow committee member, Sheila Hassan, the Executive Director of the Manchester India Partnership. Over to you, Sheila.
Hi, hello, and it was such an engaging. Thank you for that engaging conversation you had with Kim, Deepa, and I was absolutely struck by your journey, and especially things which stood out for me included the tangibles of doing your job, like for example the clothing brand which came to India. The soft power, the cultural side of diplomacy, that's something that, that's really precious to us in organizations like the Manchester India Partnership, because apart from trade and investment, we also focus on the culture and that whole soft power of the Indian diaspora and how we can bring the two regions together. So that really struck a chord. And also your sentence on easier to change rules than mindsets. So, you do have rules, and that's so true, especially in today's world, as we are trying to come out of so many crises. So, easier to change rules, but cannot change it. Very difficult to change mindsets. Two other things that really struck were also about self-awareness of young girls today, like, weigh in and be more self-aware, and don't be delusional about your handicaps or your abilities, but have a real-time check on your abilities. I think that's fantastic. And also don't expect special treatment being a woman. I think that's really good. Maybe special treatment could be during really when children are small and socially disadvantaged, maybe that at that stage, but once you're grown up and you've got all the advantages which your male peers would have got, that's the time to stop thinking about being special. So with that, I invite questions from the audience. So if anybody would want to come forward and put your questions on the chat box, or maybe if not, then I'm going to ask a question myself. So it's over to the participants. I'll wait. I haven't really got any questions as we expected initially. So maybe to fill that time, my question is, during your travels and your journey as a diplomat, did you meet any of your idols or icons? And if yes, what were your impressions?
Okay. Idols or icons. You meet so many people, who have an enduring sort of impact on you. Let me think a little bit about who I could. Let me talk about, instead of talking about somebody who is an important political figure, because, one has really, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but, you have met leaders, you met emperors, and you met kings, and, and people like that. So I will give you two examples on two sides of really the story. So one is, the actor Devanand. Why am I remembering him? He came to one of my postings when I was there, and there was some film festival. And by the time he was pretty old, he was well into his 80s. And most engaging, I was talking to him. He talked about his life, about his struggles. And what really struck me was the humility of the man. And, at the end, he'd come home for a meal. At the end of it, he got up, and there were so many people taking pictures, asking questions. And he turned to me and he said, "Could I meet the staff in your kitchen who made the dinner for us?" And he went in there, and I just thought, it's so important as we go and when, in big positions and so on, and everyone's around you, it happens. Even as ambassador, of course, now it's a very normal life, but to know that behind all that goes on, that there is somebody else, and to care for that person, I think that was very important. The other rather couple I would like to talk about is really the Emperor and the Empress of Japan. I was very fortunate to be traveling. I was in Japan when they decided to come on a state visit to India. So, when kings and queens or presidents come, so it's a big deal, and I was involved with the organization of the visit. And I got to know them to some extent, that I was there with them and traveling with them. And there again, what struck me was, one, a tremendous memory. They'd come to India about 50 years ago. A huge memory for little things that you would not imagine that they would remember. People they had met, conversations that they had, a deep interest in, various aspects. And for me as the Indian ambassador, various aspects of India, the actual curiosity, and it was a very genuine sort of interest in India. And above all, I think, was the simplicity. The way when how they tried to make me feel comfortable, because, you're quite overawed. Oh my God, you're in the, the presence of these people. And, there were occasions when there was them and, in a very small sort of setting. And while we were making these arrangements, it really struck me. It wasn't the political or the economic anything relationship, but I think them as human beings and how concerned they were. I lived by myself in Tokyo, and, once in a way they would say, "Okay, so you live alone. I hope everything is okay, and this country is taking care of you." So what I'm trying to say is that you can meet people. I could tell you how, strong political figures and prime ministers and things. Yeah, that's all fine, and our own business leaders, a lot of them that one has met. But I think what is really important are people who have, despite their position, been very caring human beings. And I think for me, that was really something.
Thank you so much for sharing these anecdotes. Really very enriching, to see the different aspects of personalities one sees from far. So now I'll move on to the next question. There is Tanvi Sabharwal Sinha. And she writes that when you had an uncertainty in a job role, how did you deal with it?
Okay, Tanvi, thank you for your question. Now, when you look at uncertainty in a job, you are saying that you're not very sure that this is really what suits you, or you suit the job that you're doing. I think, and I've said this before in some public talks that I've had, that never hesitate in that sort of situation to look at. Of course, you have to look at the pros and cons, but don't be afraid to move away. And look for something else. Because I think one of the worst things that any one of us can do is to be stuck in a place where we're not completely happy, when we are not giving our best, and when we do give our best, that's not appreciated. I think that is really not a situation that I would wish on anybody, or I would wish on myself. So I think when these are these sort of uncertainties, it is really important to be able to move on. Unless, of course, you look at them, you analyze what these uncertainties are, and you think that maybe you can bring in some sort of, course correction which would help resolve them, then certainly, I mean, then one must look at it. But I think one shouldn't be in a situation where one is not satisfied with oneself, or others are not satisfied with one.
Thank you for that. So we move on to the next question from Mark Runakers, himself a former diplomat and a very good friend of most of us, I'm sure. So Mark writes, can you pick your favorite posting as a diplomat?
First of all, I didn't know that Mark was allowed to ask questions, because we've known each other far too long for him to ask me anything. But hi, Mark. Wonderful that you're there. It's really a tough question on, which was the best posting. But I think invariably, you mature as you go ahead in your career, and at some point of time you feel you're much more comfortable in your own skin. And I would then certainly put it as Japan. And the reason why I say Japan was perhaps my best posting was also because of the relationship between India and Japan was, at that point of time, undergoing a great change for the better. And there was there's a deepening of engagement across the board. And one was very happy to play a role in this and participate in it and, be there. So I think without question, Japan perhaps was the posting I enjoyed the most. It was also, it's a fascinating country in every sense of the word. I mean, in terms of the culture, the uniqueness of the people, the economic success of the country, and its own history. So there was so much to learn, and there was so much that we could do together. So I would say Japan, but that's really not being fair. I think every country is special, and Mark should know that well. He better say India was the best posting he had.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure Mark is going to agree that India was his best posting. So next question is from Chetana V. Kathari she's asking this question from Bangalore, I think. And she says that, was there any movement? She says movement, but I think she means episode, or any development that you experienced that made you feel it was worth all the difficulties you faced?
Yes, Chetna, certainly. I'll tell you, that happens at the time, I think, when, you finally go up, you reach the pinnacle of what your career is, and you become an ambassador, and you go there carrying this piece of, what is called the agreement, this letter from your head of state to the head of state of the country that you're going in. And it's a very, these ceremonies, of course, have, are very elaborate and so on. And then you go there to present this, it's accepted by him. I think at that point of time, you suddenly realize that this entire journey, this is where you were wanting to be. You wanted to be able to represent your country in some capital of the world. I mean, wherever you are. But I think that's a very, very onerous responsibility in one way that, that your government places on you. The other country accepts you, and incidentally, agreements have to be accepted, that they accept you, and then that you have a role to play in being able to foster and to be able to fashion the relationship, in many ways make a difference in the relationship between two countries. At that point of time, you look back and you say, well, it was well worth it. That's what I would think.
Thank you. Thank you. And so now we move on to the next question. This is from Delia Hennigan of Sanam S4. And she says, she asks for any ideas on what we can do to further support a broader range of female students to rise to the highest levels. What can we as professional women do to support?
Thank you for that question. So, this is across the world, of course, but if you're talking about the Indian context, I think it's a pretty, it's daunting. It seems daunting, but it's pretty easy in the sense of opportunities. India has these huge opportunities to be able to in some way, help young and bright women scholars and students to be able to sort of fulfill what their capabilities are. And I'll tell you, so there are many ways to do it. One way is, of course, in some of the companies that I'm associated with, the corporate social responsibility, that we look a lot at women students. But at the individual level, I find that there are many programs where you can mentor young women. And there is a program in Delhi, for example, and perhaps across India it is, but I do know of the Delhi chapter, and it's called Talk to Me. That's very interesting. You know what they do? So you have women who talk to young girls who have actually, of course, they've probably gone through school. They're wondering whether they go to college, what should they do? And, they're on the threshold of a career. And, they perhaps have got some basic education. They don't have the confidence, or they do not know where they want to go. So you have these women who get into conversations with them. And this conversation could be to help them with also their English skills, for example, how to communicate better, how to face an interview better, what are their career options. So there are lots of programs which are already there, and a lot of them are led by, by women. So I think one needs to look around and see what one can do. The easiest thing that I find is really to finance the education of young girls, which my husband and I do. A lot of them are given to organizations, so there's a certain anonymity and I don't know who they are. But in some cases, one makes sure that one knows who they are and sees them through, at least to the tertiary level of education, and then helps them on with a career. So there are many opportunities, I think, everywhere. And women are, we're not in a stage where we really need to perhaps inform certainly women in an urban setting that what will make a difference to their lives. What we do need to perhaps tell them is, how do you break off the shackles of tradition and the other pressures that are on you, and that you can really make the best of your intelligence, your abilities, and so on, and to encourage them to do that. I think that is very important to do.
Thank you. Thank you for those really enriching points on how to improve the lot of young girls who are aspiring to be the next generation leaders. So from that, we go to Natasha Jha Bhaskar, who feels that this is a fascinating conversation. You mentioned tangibles and the significance of building on economic component in any bilateral relationship. How do you see this shaping up for India going forward, considering ease of business and attracting investments remain our major focus? Is the new India narrative gaining ground globally, in your opinion?
Right, Natasha. Important, question in the sense of, I think we have a much more interconnected world today. You have certainly India. I've seen the change in the course of my career. As I said, I've lived through the 80s and the 90s and seen a completely different India. I mean, today you see the FDI flows into India. You see India as actually a country that is also investing abroad. as as a growing economic power. So I do believe that the time certainly of India has come. Can we do better on ease of business? Yes, of course we can. And this is an ongoing process. But what is the pull of India? And I do know that many people who do business with India from abroad very often do talk about the impediments, the bureaucracy, the red tape, the issues that they have. And, you clear out two problems that they have, another two pop up. This is a reality too. But I can tell you something from my personal experience that the pull of India, which is really unstoppable, is its demography. And I'm not talking about demography as they do, just the fact that there's a growing market. After China, we are going to be the largest market, and there is growing purchasing power, come what may. That is going to be a reality. And that is going to get, I think, businesses not only investing in India, trading with India. I think that is going to be the basis of our economic relationship with the world. You cannot really ignore India. I know there are a lot of things that we would like to do better. Right now, we perhaps have stayed out of some economic arrangements in the neighborhood where people think we should be part of. There's still a lot of issues that continue. But what I have really seen is that this interest in India is growing, and it will grow. And we learn our lessons also as we go along. So I think do have faith and belief, and looking at the way, if you look at every indicator, just look at life in India today, versus even 10 years ago. And you'll see what a difference there has been. And this is just because of, economic growth, which is not only, a reality, it's an inevitability.
Thank you for that. Natasha, I think, has dialed in from Sydney, from Newland Global Group's Sydney. So this is truly a very global program, and no surprises because you are the main guest for this. So with your experience, I think we've attracted guests from all over the world, which is fantastic. So right now, I'm not seeing any further questions. But of course, I have my own questions for you. So maybe I will ask you that about you spoke about self-awareness in young girls, and the fact that the UPSC exams select diplomats based on their ranking, because the top people go into the IAS and the IFS. But most of the skills maybe you're not known initially when you. So what are the necessary skills for becoming a successful diplomat, or maybe a successful Indian diplomat, I would say, but just globally, what are the attributes which people should have to be successful in the area? Because clearly it's not for everybody, but you said that you felt you were suited for the role of a diplomat. So I just wanted to know what are the skills and what are the talents.
Right. Sheila, before I reply to you, I must say that since Natasha has dialed in from Australia, to tell her that my husband has just has done a report on India-Australia economic relationship, and he goes by the name of Anil Wadhwa. So you may like to look at it if you're interested in the Australia-India economic relationship. He just did this, I think it was published about a year ago on behalf of the Indian government. No, I wasn't trying to promote him. He's done this for the Indian government.
Absolutely.
So to get back to your question, what are the skills? I think diplomats around the world, of course, I think the skills will be much the same. So when we join, yes, we really know very little about what is going to happen, but you should have a basic interest in the subjects of international relations. International relations, some idea of theory. Of course, you will learn it on the job once you're there. There is a training process that is there, and that you will learn much of it. But first, to begin with, you should have an interest. Two, you have to be very adaptable, because the Foreign Service is a place where their challenges are of different sorts. One is, today you might be sitting in London, and tomorrow you might be in Mongolia, and you may be in some other part of the world, or you may be in India, or you could be in Singapore. The thing is that you're constantly, every country has its attractions and every country has its challenges, but to be able to adapt easily and actually, like change, like people, want to go out and make, to explore new places, you have to have an inquiring, open mind to be able to do that. If you're a little conservative and the fact of moving around too much upsets you, certainly this is not for one. The other thing, I think, as an Indian diplomat, and I realized that, after I joined only, I had to really know my country very well. And that process of knowing the country you represent well is as important as knowing the country that you're going to, the history of your relationship and so on, that you learn on the job. Because, there you are actually in so many situations, you are doing what is the best possible for your own country. So you've got to know your country. You've got to know to be able to explain difficult situations, and sometimes you really, really have to explain things that you first have to explain to yourself. Why is this happening in my country? And how am I honestly able to talk about this and explain it in another context? So I think one really has to know one's own country very well. One has to be adaptable. One has to certainly be interested in international relations. I must say a lot of what we do is, and I know that there are others here from the same profession, drafting skills. I think our language skills have to be very strong, because a lot of what we do is write and draft and negotiate. And so you have to have a pretty, I would say sharp, but a quick mind to be able to do that sort of stuff. Because a lot, when you talk about, you look at an international agreement at the end of it, or a convention or something, it's been drafted by people who sat there and worked over every word. So you need to have a little bit of, drafting skills, a little bit of legal, an understanding of, sort of, I suppose, legalese, so to speak. So, these are needs that are required. You acquire some of it as you go on in life, for sure. But I think to begin with, you do need to have this fundamental interest, adaptability, and be willing to sort of, to move around and enjoy what you're doing as you do it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That was really very enlightening, and we really appreciate your views. So there was Natasha Jha Bhaskar has got back, and she says, "Thanks very much, Ambassador Deepa. I have been in touch with Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, and his report is an invaluable knowledge resource on Australia-India bilateral ties. I work in the Australia-India trade and investment space." Yeah. So, we've almost reached the end of our session, and there's just 1 minute left. So, is there any last questions, any burning topics you've been waiting to ask Ambassador Deepa? So, I'm just giving you 1 minute to key in your message. Anyone? That doesn't seem like it. I think, yeah, so we've done well on time, and I cannot but begin to thank you for this most enriching session, and a fantastic meeting you. And and if you are ever traveling to the UK, the Manchester India Partnership has a standing invitation for you to come and address our members, because we are just about to start the Manchester India Business Group. So, you would be definitely one of our esteemed speakers to come and, speak. So do let us know, and do keep in touch. So with this, this is, I think, one of our best sessions so far. And I would like to thank the British Business Group, Delhi and Mumbai, the UK India Business Council, the CBI, the Oxford Cambridge Association, the Modi University, the Association of British Scholars and the Chevening Alumni Association, for supporting this session and getting a great, I think we are all close to 40 people, 50 people on the session now. So I think it's been a fantastic session. Thank you so much for your time. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheila. I remember your invitation and I'll take it up, and wonderful interacting with all of you. It's really been really a great privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deepa.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nidhi. Thank you.
Thank you.